A while back, I made a video discussing the movie Hoodwinked and specifically dedicated most of the video to debating whether or not its bad animation is enough to drag down an otherwise rather solid movie. And you can find a link in the description to that video in case you're curious. Now, I've seen very similar debates erupt around the 2004 motion capture Christmas movie, The Polar Express, with many saying that it's way too creepy looking to properly appreciate, while others say its interesting design is part of the movie's charm and that it's a great story that more than makes up for any problems the animation presents. And today, I'd like to try and explore this question for myself. From an objective standpoint, is The Polar Express actually a good movie, and particularly a good Christmas movie at that? And I would just like to give my usual warning that there will be spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen this movie yet, you should probably click off this video and come back to it another day. This will be your one and only warning. Okay, so to start off simply, yes, I believe, especially when looking at it as impartially as possible, that it's a good movie. Now, I would just like to note that I may have a slight bias here, as I'm not really the type who's impressed by visual effects, especially CGI. Not that I don't appreciate the effort that goes into it, don't get me wrong, but the point is, I do believe that I might be more willing than most to overlook the movie's rather odd animation style. But as I've already said quite a few times, I'm trying to keep my opinion out of the conversation here. And even when looking at it that way, I'd still say it's a good movie. Because if nothing else, the animation certainly gives it a style all its own, which is certainly something that most other CGI movies can't claim to have. But that being said, even then, it's not the animation that makes the movie stick out, because where this movie really shines is in its brilliant story. And the beauty of that lies in its simplicity, because at its core, this movie is simply trying to encourage children to believe in Santa Claus and the magic of Christmas. No meta commentaries, no subversions, just an interesting take on a tried and true formula. I mean, a train that takes children questioning their belief in Santa Claus to the North Pole so they can see the man for himself, with one of them receiving a special Christmas gift from him? But it's not just the overall premise that makes the movie work, but how it gets its central theme across as well. Which is, as I just said, to believe. And while that moral may be a bit obvious throughout the movie, it's delivered in a way that never feels overbearing and completely sincere. Especially the scene where Hero Boy grabs the fallen bell, and no matter how much he shakes it, he can't hear it ring. All he hears is it say, "Doubter." So he finally closes his eyes and says, "I believe," and finally hears it ring. Not because he said it, but because he meant it. And then Santa shows up, and you can tell that even he's surprised, but also impressed by what's just happened. And then we find out through narration that he never forgot the lesson he learned that night, and from then on could hear the bell ring even into his old age. After that, he never stopped believing. Seriously, nobody can say that this movie doesn't do an excellent job of capturing that feeling, that special feeling all great Christmas movies have. And having Josh Groban singing the movie's theme song, which only reinforces it, doesn't hurt either. But the point is, that message is about a lot more than just believing in Santa Claus, or even the spirit of Christmas. Because obviously the movie does exaggerate the reality of some of the stuff you see, but what it's really trying to say is sometimes you have to believe in something no matter how much evidence there is that you shouldn't. That sometimes what seems to be impossible is actually real when you believe that it is. And that sometimes fiction can become a reality when you believe that strongly in it. In other words, this movie's message is about the eternal optimism, joy, and hope that believing can bring to people, and how sometimes it can make the impossible come to life. And you have to admit, that's a great message for a Christmas movie to have. That sometimes you should believe in something good, even when all logic is telling you not to. But even that aside, the movie also has a lot of other things going for it as well. It's got a great cast, and especially many great performances by Tom Hanks in particular, from the conductor that's a much nicer man than he sometimes presents himself as, to the homeless ghost who plays both Devil's Advocate and Guardian Angel's hero boy, to jolly old Saint Nick himself, and even as the motion capture for the main character. Seriously, you'd never know it wasn't the same person doing the voice and movements for him. And you also have some very other good characters, such as the personification of optimism and support in Hero Girl, to the slightly darker side of what Christmas means to certain children in Billy. Though, of course, this being a Christmas movie, things ultimately end on a hopeful note for him, and more funny characters such as Know-It-All, in a perfect performance by Eddie Dezzing, as well as the two engineers. Seriously, their mutual "oh no" when the pin falls through the grate never fails to get me laughing. But of course, that's just me. And Santa Claus himself is portrayed exactly how the big guy should, as a very wise old man that's a friend to all children. And in addition to the cast, the movie also has quite a few great action scenes, especially the scene on the frozen lake where the CGI animation is probably put to its best use, and also has perhaps one of the most interesting takes on the North Pole you'll ever see. From the complicated process of the naughty or nice list, to the labyrinth-like city, to the size of Santa's sack, to the elf that looks suspiciously like Steve Tyler, to the fact that time seems to run completely differently there. In all honesty, this is probably one of the most realistic depictions of Santa's workshop out there. And yet, it works. The mixture of realism and fantasy are perfectly blended together and even serve as something of a reflection of Hero Boy's conflicted nature over whether to believe in what he's seeing or to give in to what logic is telling him, which is that all of this is just a dream. In other words, the landscape arguably serves as the perfect metaphor for how Hero Boy feels by that point in the story. Fantasy and reality are clashing all around him, and he doesn't know what to believe is true. So, to put it all simply, the Polar Express might have rather dated and even somewhat creepy looking CGI, but it's got way more going for it than against it. It's got a great cast with great characters and performances all around, puts its CGI to good use for a few action scenes, has pretty good comedy, and portrays Santa in a slightly unorthodox light, but one that nonetheless stays true to the spirit of him. And finally, it not only has a great moral, but delivers it in a very effective way. And really, what more could you ask for in a Christmas movie? It's honestly a pretty big shame that some people denounce it on its animation style alone, because as I just spent the whole video going over, it does ultimately have a lot more to it than that. And as I've said in many other videos, a movie is a lot more than just its visuals, and it's movies like The Polar Express that prove it. Because if it had been made in live action or with traditional animation, but otherwise remained completely unchanged, I'd guarantee you that it would be much more fondly remembered today than it ultimately is because of its animation style. Alright, that's all I have to say on that. So now I'd like you to tell me, do you believe The Polar Express is a great Christmas movie in spite of its questionable CGI? Or do you believe that the unintentional creep factor of the motion capture is too much to ignore and that it drags down the whole movie because of it? Please feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, you don't have to agree with me on this video. You can believe the movie's awful and that I've got everything backwards if you want to. You are just as entitled to your opinion as I am to mine. And finally, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.